Well, hello, welcome back. We're getting close to a complete application, so we have a bunch of little tasks in this segment, but we're going to do one larger task, and that is we're going to allow the user to delete a record from the SQLite database. So here's what I think we'll do. in this segment, we're going to improve the list view a little bit. It's still fairly ugly. So small steps, without getting all tangled up in something that's too hard to understand, we can get to the next step. And if you do that fast instead of jumping into the middle of something that's too hard, then the result is a little bit more satisfying and you don't throw up your hands and give up. So that's one thing we're going to do, and we're going to improve the enter scores layout, the original one, just a little bit again. And here's something that's kind of fun. We're going to raise a toast. So when the user enters their scores, as of right now, there is no confirmation that the scores were put in the database. And we're going to use a very simple mechanism to raise a toast. And this kind of falls under the heading of adding something that's unexpected and what the Android people call a delight. So we'll put a delight in the user interface. Yeah, you'll see. It's just very, very easy. Okay, and the big thing that we're going to do is to delete a record. So we'll hear an item being selected from the list view, and we will put up a dialog asking them, do they really want to delete that? And we will remove the record from the SQLite database and from the array list. And if you take a piece of data out of the middle, then we have to remember to update all of the running averages and to display the revised data. So remember that the running average is the average of this particular bowler's scores, and if you take one out of the middle, then the data is going to be stale. So let's go into the development environment, see if I can remember that these are the things that we're going to do, and do them one by one. Well, let's do the easy one first. We're in the Enter Scores dialog, and these two buttons, well, they should be the same size and they should be easier to get at. So I'm going to change the Save button properties so that its layout width, instead of as big as the button needs to display save, I'm going to change it to match parent. And now we have a save button that's easier to get our fat fingers on. Okay, my fat fingers. Now, be careful with this. I've selected the show history, and sometimes the properties of what's selected here aren't the properties that actually show up here. So what I've gotten accustomed to doing is I open the outline and make sure that I have the right component highlighted that I want to change the properties of, and I'm going to change this one to match parent as well. Remember that they have, it used to be called fill parent, and they've changed that to match parent in later versions. So to me this looks just slightly better. And we're working in a very strange QVGA screen, and we could change that so that we could put some more space in here and so on. But I'm going to leave that kind of rearranging task to when we decide to test on various kinds of devices. And we will just leave it the way it is for now, understanding that perhaps when we go to exploring what devices we're willing to deploy on, or we want to deploy on, we might make some adjustments based on different device capabilities. So this is what we have now. This does look a little bit better. Maybe I should put some space between those two buttons to disassociate them. I'll leave that as an exercise for you. And what I want us to work on now is this view, the list view for the history of the bowling scores. So I've entered a whole bunch of perfect games here, and well, we can do better than this. This is taking up too much room, and we would like to have more information here. So let's go and look at the history layout. I'll get rid of that one. So the screen gets so cluttered so quickly. And the history activity. So the history activity is where we, in a very small amount of code, we extended list activity, and then we associated a list adapter with this array. So a list adapter, we made an instance of array adapter, and we passed in this guy as what would be on each row, and it's a predefined one in the Android resources called simple list item 1, and we did that because it was no work. It was done for us. So what I want us to do now is to replace this with a row of our own design. So let's go into layout and say I want to make a new, let's see, a new other, an Android XML file. And let's call this file history row, and don't use any uppercase letters in the name of an XML file, and I'm not really sure if I have to type the extension there, but I will. And do I want this to be a layout? Let's start with that. I think we're going to have to change it, because we don't really want a layout for this. We just want a text view. So let's go in and see if it, yes, it did give us a linear layout, and I'm going to change that to a text view. And remember, we're defining what will be on one row. So in one row, we're going to have a text view that is the whole width of the screen, and the height doesn't really matter here. What we're going to do is add two things: some padding, and I'll put 10 density pixels there. There's no commas, and a text size and I'm going to change that to 16 so that it will be a little bit smaller. Okay, so a little text view for the purpose of using a view for the row that is our own design. So it will have been generated in r.layout. And there it is. Nope, there it is, history row. And let's see if we gained something there. When you're typing in an XML file, you need to be really, really careful. When you're typing in Java, the compiler will use the squiggly red lines to tell you where the errors are, but in XML it's a whole lot easier to make a typo in here and get away with it. Even though an XML file is parsed, it's not really compiled. So there's stuff that you can make mistakes in here. one guy I was working with testing these videos put a dot instead of a colon, and it caused all sorts of problems. It wasn't found until a strange exception was thrown at runtime, and it was quite difficult to find. So let's, given that one change, that we've changed the layout for the row, I like to clear the console once in a while so I'm not looking at old stuff. Let's just run this again and make sure that we have a slightly better appearance on the history. Okay, so it doesn't look all that much different, except we have more space here because these are considerably smaller, and there's still room to get your fat fingers on here. That's an Android term. They keep saying that. So what I'd like to do, in our original plan for this view, we had the date, the 3 games, the series total, the average of the series, and then the running average. So we have we left out the average of the series because there wasn't really enough room here, and I'd like to go and put that back. So what I'm really wanting to know is, on this particular date, did I bowl above my season average? And that's an interesting thing to see in that particular view. So in the history layout, let's go and, do I have an outline window over here? Okay, we've got game 1, game 2, game 3, series, and then average. I'm going to change that to, we're going to need a little more room here. Run AVG. Do you think people will know that that means the running average? And I want to put something in between it. Another text view. And I want that one to say AVG. Put a space at the end of it. Well, it just barely fits the average and the running average. Okay, so the line of text that we put here in this view is the result of the toString in the bowling scores class. Did you remember that? I hope so. So this returns the date, game 1, game 2, game 3, then the series, and let's add well, it's going to be a double, so let's format it with one place past the decimal. I'll steal that one. I'll put a space at the end of it, but I don't want running average there. I want this dot calculate series average. And I didn't need this, I just wanted it to tell me what was available in here so I wouldn't have to scroll up and get that and spell it wrong and everything. So now we're outputting one more item on this row, and it doesn't cost very much to run it. We leave the emulator going. Okay, so we have the date, game 1, game 2, game 3, the total, then the average and the running average. These don't match the titles very well, and this would be nice in kind of a grid with headers, and that is the next step to making this interface a little bit better in its appearance. But it's a fairly difficult step, and I don't want to spend that much time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, this is okay for now, that we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of data in the row. These are not interesting because I just hit enter a whole bunch of times. And let's leave this suboptimal layout the way it is for now and work on the remaining things in our list of things we were going to do. Remember these? Raise a toast to confirm a set of scores is entered. So here's something. When you save the data, nothing happens. For the user's perspective, that data went into the database, but they can't even tell that, so the database is really a big mess now. So there are different ways of notifying the user that something has happened. One of them is to put up a dialog, and we could do that. We know how to put up dialogues. And the other one is raise a toast. So let's go and find the place where we, in the enter scores activity, we collected the data, we validated it, we added it, and now right in here, after we've added it, I want to tell the user that something has happened. Well, there's a mechanism called a toast. It's kind of a funny word for it, but it's a very simple one-liner here. We're going to make text, and the context is get application context. Context is kind of what are the variables available at the current time that you're executing, and well, the toast wants the application context, which is always available when you're in an activity. And I'm going to write, it wants some text that we will raise in the toast. Thank you for entering your scores. I don't like random capitalization. And the duration of the toast is how long the message will stay there, and we'll use the defined constant length long. And that's really all there is to it. So a toast, let's watch one happen. So getting the activity going is much faster than it used to be. So if we save data now, where's my toast? Not working. Okay, let's go and figure out what we've done wrong. And for goodness sake, I forgot to do the most important thing. You have to call the show method. Okay, so if you're wondering how do I learn these things, I dig them out of examples and I follow along with the examples, and sometimes I make mistakes. I don't get what was done in the examples quite right, but it seems to be looking at other people's code is a fairly fast way of me learning this. So here we are again, and hopefully, okay, there's the toast. Thank you for entering your scores. And maybe it would have been better to automatically, when the user saves their data, to go to the show history view. I'm not really sure. but we might have to have a user test this and get their reaction to interacting with the user interface. Okay, so we made a small improvement to the user interface. We added the toast, and now we're going to delete a record. So we're going to hear an item from the list view from the history activity, and then we will remove a record from the database and at the same time from the array list. When we take a piece of data out, you know that we're going to have to recalculate the running averages. So if you take out a very low score in the middle, then the running averages on all of the other subsequent weeks would be changed. So let's start going and adding the ability to hear an item being selected from that list view. Okay, so let's go into the history activity. I guess I should clean this up a little bit, get rid of some things I don't want. I don't need to have that row open. I don't think I need bowling scores. The history layout, let's leave that there for now, and the history activity. Okay, so here's where we set the adapter to display the data. This is not really the right way of doing this. Let's put this the way it should be. That feels better. Now, we are inside of, we have extended the list activity, and we want access, we need to get a handle on the list view. The list view that is part of that list activity. So let's just go and get one. I'll call it the list view. How's that? And we can use the inherited method. I'll put this dot so that we can see what the methods are, but there is one called getListView. And I think we must need to import that. Okay, so now we have a reference to the list view object. And it can be associated with listeners. So you call a set when you want to associate an object that can generate an event with an object that can handle the event. So we're going to look for set on, what is the event we want? Item click. And we need a listener for that. Okay, so I'm going to put this down here, and we're going to build the listener inside of it. And we've done this before. We're going to make a new on item. Yeah, get rid of this guy. That was the placeholder. On item click listener. That's the name of the interface. An open brace and a close brace. Let's ask Eclipse to help us. If we say source, override and implement methods, I think this will help us. No methods to override for this type. Well, I know we need an onItemClick method. Why won't it help us? Oh, maybe we need to import it. Huh. Yes. onItemClick. That's the one we need. Okay. Get a little more room here. So onItemClick is the method that will be called when the user selects an item in the list view. Okay, so the list view is the object that can generate the event, and this is the handler for it. We're going to make one instance of that and pass it into the set onItemClick listener method. So we have an association between this object that's highlighted and this object, and the association is this is the listener for that thing that might generate an event. Okay, so what do we need in here? arg0, people usually call that the parent, and I'm not sure why. We don't need to use it for anything. And the view, I don't think we will need to use that for anything. This one is the position, and we do need to use that. The position in the list where the user has clicked on something. And we don't need to use the last one either, but it has to be there, and we're calling it ID. We don't need the ID, but this is what will happen when someone clicks on or selects an item from the list. So what we want to do is called verify delete row. I'm making this up, and pass in the position. That method doesn't exist, but I'm going to make it. Be careful with the scope of this method. We're putting it in the scope of the history activity. Verify. It's a helper, so it can be private. I don't think we need anything back. Verify delete row in that position. I think I would like to log something here. I'm going to just put debug. I hear item selected. and I will concatenate in there which item it is, the position. Okay, so this is kind of my defensive tactics. Let's import the logging. If something goes wrong in this, I want to be able to go and look in the log and see if the item that I hoped was selected was getting selected. And in here, all of this part is to do with the GUI and getting that number of the item that we're going to take out of the list. So in verify delete row, let's make an alert dialog. Let's pop up a dialog and ask the user, do you really want to delete this, or do you want to leave it? So I think that's pretty standard, that when you're interacting with your application, if you ask to delete something, there is this confirmation step. So we'll go and get the code where we built an alert, a pop-up alert before, and we'll just copy it and modify it. So do you remember where we did that before? In the enter scores activity, here's an alert dialog. What did we do in there? What was the purpose of this? Oh, to tell the user that the bowling scores were not greater than 300. And don't forget to show it if you're going to make it correctly. So I'm going to just take this piece of code, including the pop-up a dialog comment, and we can put it in our history activity to verify that the user wants to delete that row. And of course we'll have to change it. Pop up the dialog to confirm delete row. Okay, so the title of this dialog, what do we want to put there? Delete this series. The bowlers will know what a series is. It's a row in the database. That would make more sense to them than say, do you want to delete a row in the database? And then the message. Let's put, do you want to delete this data? And I'm going to concatenate the, well, you're supposed to take the operator with you when you go to a new line, so I'll do it right. From all bowling scores, we're going to get the item that is in position. Okay, so that I think will actually show the user in the pop-up dialog what the data is that they are going to be deleting. I wonder if I can put a carriage return in there. We'll just see what happens. I think that that will put 2 lines on the message of the pop-up. And cancelable. Now we have the opportunity now to put buttons. And the design of these, according to the Android people, is that you should put something, instead of yes, okay, cancel, the traditional buttons, you should put something on the buttons that is meaningful in the application. So on the positive button, I'll put delete. And let's do a negative button first. Should we? Yeah, let's do a set negative button. And now we want a character sequence. No, leave it there. And now we need an on-click listener right here. So this argument, even though it's very, very small, it looks like arg1, we need something very significant there. We need to make a listener. And this listener is not going to do very much. It's just going to close the dialogue, but we have to do it. So we're going to make a new oh, well, here's one right here. Why don't I just copy it? And in fact, that's what I want to do. So I want a new, and here's the on-click method. I just want to cancel, but I don't want a semicolon there. Okay, this is getting a little bit confusing with the indentation. I'm going to ask Eclipse to format this for me. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So it's a one-liner. It's going to cancel the dialogue if someone says, no, leave it there. And then the positive button, you could put delete on it, and there's a click listener. So on click, what do we want to do? Well, we would want to delete the data from the database. So instead of canceling the dialogue, we want to go and get the bowling scores object that we want to delete. I need a little more room here. Okay, so the bowling scores object that we're going to delete, get that out of all bowling scores at position. Whoops, I meant to say get at position. Why doesn't it like that? Oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. Okay. I'm just going to save this and let's think about this right now. The error message is cannot refer to a non-final variable position inside an inner class defined in a different method. Okay, that's a very long error message that's very complicated. So what they're telling us is that right here we have defined an inner class. It's an anonymous inner class, and the purpose of it is to just pass this one method into this method. But you can't pass a method in Java. You have to make an object and pass the object that has the method in it. So because this is an inner class, you don't have access to the variables that are outside of the inner class unless they are final. Okay, so what does it mean that this parameter is final? It means that it will not change throughout the execution of this method. So if we tried to say position gets anything in here, it won't let us. So we have now retrieved from the bowling scores list array list the bowling scores object that we want to delete. Now whose job is it to delete the to manipulate the database? It's the application. So let's go and get the application. My bowling scores application you can always call get application, and you have to downcast it because it returns an object of type application, but we want it to return an object of type my bowling scores application. And now using that object, we can say delete bowling scores and pass in the object that we want to delete. Well, there is no such method. And I like to write code kind of backwards. Call the methods that you wish were there, and then Eclipse will help us. So one of the options here to fix that error is to create a method, delete bowling scores, that takes the bowling scores in the my bowling scores application. Let's have it do that, and lo and behold, here it is. It pops open the my bowling scores application. And what are we going to do in here? Well, let's look for add bowling scores. Maybe I'll just move this up next to its partner. So we've got add bowling scores and delete bowling scores. And in here we're going to take that bowling scores object out of the database and out of the array list. So let's start figuring out how to do that. Well, this turns out to be not too difficult. We want to delete the bowling scores, one record out of the database, and we have the object that we want to delete. So we have a reference to the bowling scores database in this object, so that's available to us. I'm going to save a little bit typing and just put that guy there. And we want to call his delete method. So what table are we going to delete out of? You might have to go and look at the constants that we defined in the database helper, but I remember bowling scores table. It will help you. Now the where clause. If you know about SQL delete, we're going to delete something from the database where something is true, and I'm going to break the line here. This is a fairly simple one, so we don't need the last argument at all. It's just this one, the where clause in the delete statement, the SQL delete statement. And I dug around a little bit, and what we need to specify here is the record ID concatenate it to an equal sign, concatenate it to the toDelete object, and get the ID out of that object. Okay, let's think about this for a second. So this is one string, and we're saying delete from bowling scores table where the record ID, and that's a string, that's the name of the field in the database, is equal to the ID of the object that we want to delete. So remember, in a relational database there's a primary key, and we've been allowing the primary key to be generated uniquely, the ID to be generated uniquely by SQLite as we add the objects into the database. So you might have been wondering, why is it interesting for these bowling scores objects to carry around a record ID? It doesn't appear anywhere for the user, and it's because of this. We needed that ID to most easily go back and delete the item out of the database. We could go and look at the data in the object and dig through the database, making a very complicated delete statement where we look for a record where the date is this and game 1 is that and game 2 is that, and delete that item. But this one is a surefire way of doing it. It makes it much easier, and it's much less error prone. There is only one record with that ID because we know they're unique. It's the primary key, and if you have the bowling scores object carry that around, well, it makes it very easy. And I don't know if you can hear that or not, but we have a very good thunderstorm going right now. Okay. So, I want to log something. In database, I want to log that we have deleted and go and get well, there's something else that might be useful here. This delete method returns the count of how many records were deleted. So just in case it didn't work, so what did we delete? We deleted count records and making a big string that might be helpful when something goes wrong. Okay, so put in the log that we deleted hopefully 1 records. Better be 1 record. And what the record was. And what else do we have to do? Do you remember? Let's get that record out of the array list. And the remove will either take an index or it will take an actual object that you want to remove from the database. One more thing, we have to update the running averages. Okay, so we took a piece of data out of the database. It might have come out of the middle, and the running scores, the running averages, might need to, well, they do need to be revised. Okay, let's see where we are from here. So when we run the application now, if we go over to show history, we have our history here, and we can pick one, and it says, delete this series. Do you want to delete this data? And if I say no, leave it there, nothing will happen. So just pick one, and if we say delete, it seems to have worked, but there's a bug. And it's an interesting bug. So let's pick another one, and here's the dreaded, the application has stopped unexpectedly. Please try again. So let's go into the DDMS and into the log and see if we can figure out what's going on in here. Okay, a fatal exception. That's not good. Well, here are the logs that we put in for the database. Deleted 1 record, and that seems to have worked. And now we get this shutting down the VM. And we have this illegal state exception. This is kind of annoying that you can't really see the whole message. The content of the adapter has changed, but list view did something, which is cut off. The content of your adapter is not modified from a background thread, but only from the blank. Yeah, isn't that annoying that we cannot see the whole message? So something has happened. The content of the adapter has changed. And it has something to do with layout the children in the list view. So this took me a little while to figure out, but I figured it out from this partial message that we can see. And maybe, I guess the reason that I can't see all of this message is because I'm using such a low resolution on this screen, it's not expected that we would be working with 1024 pixels here. So let's go into the history activity. Remember that this is a list activity, and think about what happens when this list activity gets created. When we create the activity, we set the content view to be the history layout, and we have an adapter, and all bowling scores is put in the list view. So the last thing we did when we deleted a record was we changed the content of all bowling scores, but we didn't regenerate this layout. So when we go back and try and select something else from the list, we get this unhandled exception saying that the list view isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing now because the data is different from when we set it up. So we can kind of have an understanding of what's going on here, and what I need to do is I'm going to call this onCreate method again. So onCreate, after we delete, use the application to delete one of the records in the database. I want to call onCreate, and the problem is we need to have a bundle. So I'm going to add another instance variable here. The saved state instance, and I'm going to say when this onCreate is called, this dot saved state instance gets saved state instance. So we've saved a copy of the bundle that was passed in when we called onCreate, and now we're going to call onCreate again. And pass in that object that we saved. This is not exactly the right way of doing this, and we're breaking the rules a little bit by calling onCreate. It's one of the life cycle methods of the activity, but we can do it. We can tell it to go and recreate that the view. So let's run this again. I need to see the console. So now it is started. If we go over here and show history, just pick one and say let's delete it, and then pick another one and say let's delete it. Pick another one and say let's delete it. These are all the same, and it's kind of annoying because we can't really tell that it's doing what we want it to do. It's not crashing. But let's get a fresh database. Let's go into the DDMS, look under Data, Data, and then we have our My Bowling Scores application under Database. Let's just throw this away. And run the application again. I'm going to stop the application. Just make sure that that database is gone. So when we run this time, If we show history, there isn't any data there. Go back. Let's add some data. Let's add data for yesterday. No, that's May 25th. That's okay. May 25th. And put in something that we can recognize. Hit the escape key to get that out of the way. Thank you for entering your scores. There's our toast. Okay, so here's May 25th. We have a set of data and our running average is 274. Let's add a piece of data for June 25th. So the running average, you can kind of see the behavior now. We bold worse. So our running average went down from 274 to 261. We bold less than our current running average. Let's add one more. Suppose we add one for June 27th. Let's add $222. So we bold 274 that week, and 248 that week, and 222 that week, and our running average is 248. Let's take out the middle one. And that seems to be working. Okay, so I broke the rules a little bit for the life cycle of the activity, and what I really should have done is used something called a content provider for that screen, and it's a fairly complicated process, so I'm accepting that we're breaking the rule by calling the onCreate method with a saved copy of a saved reference to the bundle that was passed in. Let's make that private so we don't get into any more trouble. Well, as I was playing with the application, I forgot about this. When we go into the text field to enter the scores, it's really kind of awkward because you have to delete this 300, which is a dummy score, in there. And if we go into the enter scores XML, each of the edit texts where we're going to enter the bowling scores, there is a property select all on focus. So if we click in there and it highlights all of them, then we can just replace the data with the data that we want. So if we set that to true, it will make the user interface a little bit easier for entering the data. Well, that's actually a big improvement in the user interface, the usability. So if we pick this one, and it's not doing what I expected it to. What happened? Sorry. Save that. That's an interesting one. If we didn't save the Java file, it would have warned us about it, but because we didn't save the XML file, it seemed to not make that change. So the activity is starting again, and because it comes up with the focus in this one, it already has the the text all selected. Oh, did I only change one? I meant to change all of them. I only changed one, but there's an example of what would happen if you gave the focus to that edit text. It selects them all, and you don't have to be doing this delete, 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 and so on. Okay, so let's just make sure that we have all of those changed to select all on focus. And we make another small improvement to the application. Well, what's next? Is our application functionally complete? What is our definition of done? The definition of done is often difficult. If you don't have an exact spec written down, this is one of the problems with agile development. You develop things in an agile way and you change it as you go along, and that's good, and then it never is finished, and that's bad. So what are the other things that we could have done in this application? Maybe we could offer the user the opportunity to change a record instead of delete. So if one of the game scores was wrong, we should update the database record and the array list instead of having to delete the whole record and then go back. Make the text more visible on a light background. So there are people complaining to me that, well, they don't know that those characters will be easy to look at, and if you're of a certain age, maybe that's harder than for others. Other features that we could have added to the application so far. This one is one that's kind of interesting to me. Email the scores to myself, or maybe post them on my Facebook page. When you take a picture with your mobile phone, one of the things you can do is you can share it directly on your Facebook page. So why not post your bowling scores, and all of your Facebook friends can jeer at you for bragging about how good a bowler you are. A menu button to remove all of the data. So suppose we've kept the records for the current bowling season and we want to start a new season. Maybe warn the user if the data is already been entered. So if you entered your bowling scores for this week and then you forgot and entered them again, maybe you could say, oh, on January 24th you already have entered your scores for that date. And the big test of what else should be added is when you show it to others and they give you feedback on what they like and don't like about it. So what do we absolutely have to do before we can say done? We have to have an application icon, and we have to test the application on several virtual devices and make adjustments based on things that we didn't expect. If we want to market to people who have various devices and various releases of Android, and then test on physical devices, as many as we have. I have only one that would be able to test with a 2.2 Android or higher. And then if we're satisfied that it's working at least a little bit, deploy it to the Android App Store. So that's where we are right now. In this segment, we made some improvements to the user interface. The list view is a little bit better than it was. It's still not really, really good. And we improved enter scores just a little bit. We raised the toast after entering the data to let the user know that the numbers that they entered there were correctly put into the database. And we deleted a record from the database by hearing an item click in the list view. Very good. I'll see you in the next one.